This is not a trial. It is an education. A harsh lesson from the Roman prefect Quintinus, detailing the consequences when a woman's conviction eclipses a powerful man's ego. Within the confines of a Sicilian subterranean cell, the esteemed Agatha confronts him. Though her physique bears the marks of maltreatment, her spirit remains defiantly unyielding. She has spurned his advances, rejected his authority, and turned away from his deities. Now he intends to exact retribution. The prefect issues a command, not for the lash or the rack, but for something more invasive, more dishonoring. The executioners advance, iron shears in hand, prepared to defile her femininity. They anticipate shrieks, they expect pleas for clemency. Instead, they are met with an expression of utter, unsettling tranquility, the visage of a triumphant martyr. How does a woman of noble lineage and unshakable faith find herself imprisoned, facing mutilation at the behest of the most influential man in Sicily? And why does she greet such a demise not with cries of agony, but with pronouncements of victory? The answer originates within the opulent halls of aristocracy, where Agatha made a pivotal decision that irrevocably altered her destiny. Before we delve deeper into her narrative, I encourage you to subscribe to the channel. It is the most effective method to join us for each upcoming exploration into the forgotten eras of history. In the marble halls of Sicily's most distinguished villa, a young woman arrived at a resolution that would resonate through the annals of time. The year was 231 AD, and Catania thrived with the commerce and culture of the Roman Empire. Vessels docked daily at the harbor, conveying silk from the east and vintages from the mainland. The affluent resided in estates adorned with fountains and frescoes, attended by servants catering to their every need and comfort. Agatha had entered this privileged existence. Her family's renown opened doors throughout Sicily. Her education encompassed Grecian philosophy and Roman poetry. She could have entered into matrimony with individuals of even greater affluence, solidifying political alliances that would elevate her family's standing for generations. Young men from distinguished families had already spoken her name in the public forums, eager for an introduction. However, Agatha had already pledged her heart to another. Not to the son of a merchant or a military commander, but to an ideology that was rapidly permeating the empire's lower strata and increasingly attracting nobles like herself. Christianity proffered a revolutionary concept, a deity who cherished slaves as much as senators, who esteemed women as souls equal to men, who offered eternal life not through noble birth, but through unwavering faith. At the tender age of 15, when most maidens her age were preparing for advantageous unions, Agatha took a vow of perpetual virginity. She dedicated herself to Christ, choosing a celestial spouse over an earthly one. The reaction of her parents remains unrecorded by history, yet we can surmise their astonishment. This was not merely a religious inclination. It was an act of societal defiance. Within Roman society, a woman of noble birth derived her primary worth from her capacity to forge alliances through marriage and produce progeny. Agatha's vow utterly shattered these expectations. She attended clandestine Christian assemblies in residences and subterranean burial chambers. She utilized her family's resources to aid the indigent and sustain the clandestine church. Her beauty, erudition, and social standing rendered her prominent in Catanian society, but her faith rendered her a person of interest. The Roman Empire in 231 AD stood at a critical juncture. Traditional Roman religious practices were losing their hold on the populace. Eastern mystery cults promised individual salvation. Christianity experienced the most rapid expansion, its message of a singular God and everlasting life resonating with those who found no solace in Jupiter's distant pronouncements. However, this growth made Christians targets. They refused to offer sacrifices to the Roman pantheon. They declined to acknowledge the divine nature of the emperor. They convened in secrecy and addressed each other as brother and sister, thereby fueling suspicions regarding their activities. Agatha navigated these perilous currents with remarkable fortitude. By day, she fulfilled her societal obligations, attending galas and public functions as her status dictated. By night, she engaged in prayer with fellow adherents and distributed provisions to Christian families evading the authorities. Her fellow believers recounted her gentle demeanor and resolute conviction. Younger women sought her counsel regarding the preservation of their faith in a world that was often hostile. Whispers of Agatha's loveliness and unconventional choices circulated throughout Catanian society. The majority dismissed her Christian beliefs as youthful impetuosity destined to fade with the appearance of a suitable suitor. Others admired her steadfastness, even without sharing her convictions, but rumors also reached less benevolent ears. In a society where female autonomy was severely curtailed, Agatha's independence rendered her an object of curiosity at best and a threat at worst. She could have lived a life of quiet devotion, practicing her faith privately while maintaining public respectability. Many Christians adopted this strategy, remaining inconspicuous until intermittent persecutions subsided. Yet Agatha's compassion precluded such prudence. When Christian households encountered adversity, she appeared at their thresholds bearing sustenance and currency. When believers were apprehended, she leveraged her connections to visit them in captivity. Her faith was not a personal solace, but a public declaration. This decision would soon attract the attention of Sicily's most formidable figure. Quintinus had recently assumed his post as the new Roman prefect, tasked with upholding order and enforcing imperial decrees. He carried a reputation for ambition, cruelty, and the attainment of his desires. The confluence of Agatha's allure, her noble standing, and her perplexing rejection of suitors made her precisely the sort of challenge that would intrigue a man accustomed to effortless victories. Upon hearing reports of a captivating noblewoman who spurned marriage, Quintinus resolved to witness this enigma firsthand. And the moment Quintinus first beheld her, he determined she would be his, regardless of the price. Quintinus had never experienced denial in his lifetime until his encounter with Agatha, born into provincial nobility. He had ascended the ranks of the Roman civil service with unyielding efficiency. His military tenure in Germania had earned him a reputation for brutality that served him effectively in Roman politics. His appointment as prefect of Sicily represented both a reward and an opportunity. The island's prosperity could replenish his coffers, while its geographical remoteness from Rome granted him virtually absolute authority. He arrived in Catania like a tempest, immediately asserting his dominance. Local magistrates who questioned his methods found themselves supplanted. Merchants who protested new tariffs discovered their permits revoked. Within months, Quintinus had transformed the prefecture into his personal dominion. His villa overlooked the harbor, its interiors adorned with art plundered from temples and the residences of those who had displeased him. For the first time in his life, someone had defied him. The refusal occurred during a public festival honoring Minerva. Quintanus had observed Agatha amidst the assembled noble families and conveyed his interest through intermediaries. Custom dictated that a woman of her station should feel honored by the prefect's attention. Instead, she declined his invitation with courteous but firm words conveyed to him indirectly. The messenger who delivered her refusal barely escaped with his life. Quintanus's interest escalated into an obsession. He began appearing at every public function where Agatha might be present. His gaze would find her within the throng, observing as she conversed with other nobles or presented offerings at temples, attending them solely for the sake of appearances. He dispatched gifts, jewels from Egypt, fragrances from Arabia, silks that cost more than most citizens earned in a lifetime. Each offering was returned unopened. His staff grew increasingly anxious as their master's mood deteriorated. Quintanus had vanquished Germanic warriors and quelled uprisings in Gaul. He had navigated the treacherous political landscape of Rome itself. Yet the rejection by a young woman consumed him like a fever. He commanded his informants to ascertain every detail about her. They returned with perplexing reports. She spent time with slaves and freedmen, visited impoverished districts after dusk, and attended gatherings in private residences where participants intoned peculiar hymns. The possibility that Agatha might be a Christian should have immediately curtailed his interest. Christians were deemed enemies of the state, atheists who renounced the gods and threatened the social fabric. But Quintanus viewed her faith merely as another impediment to surmount. He had subdued more resilient spirits than hers. His torture chambers had compelled brave men to betray their own mothers. What was a young woman's religious conviction against the prefect's will? His obsession intensified with each rebuff. Quintanus began to perceive Agatha's refusal as a personal affront, a challenge to his authority that others might witness. If a woman could deny the prefect without consequence, what message would that convey? He started to interpret her independence as sedition, her virtue as arrogance demanding correction. In his distorted reasoning, subjugating Agatha became essential not only for personal gratification, but also for the preservation of order. He attempted various stratagems, amiable conversations at public events where avoidance was impossible, pressure exerted upon her family through bureaucratic harassment, veiled suggestions that their noble status was contingent upon his favor. However, Agatha remained unmoved, consistently polite, perpetually distant, and utterly inaccessible. Her composure in his presence further fueled his ire. She regarded him without fear, as if his power held no significance. Late into the night, Quintanus would pace the halls of his villa, goblet in hand, railing at his guards about the ungrateful woman who scorned Rome's representative. His subordinates learned to concur with increasingly violent fantasies regarding his intentions once he had her at his mercy. They had witnessed him in such a state before. The Germanic chieftain who had insulted him had perished over 3 days, crying out for mercy that never arrived. What Quintanus failed to grasp was that Agatha's rejection was not personal. She would have rejected any suitor, irrespective of his power or wealth. Her heart belonged to Christ. Her body was consecrated to a spiritual union. But Quintanus could only interpret rejection as an insult to his manhood, a denial of his authority that necessitated a response. His pride would not permit him to simply pursue easier conquests. Reports from his informants became more detailed. Agatha undoubtedly associated with Christians. She had been observed entering residences known to harbor the prescribed faith. Funds from her family's coffers were channeled to support these adversaries of Rome. This provided Quintanus with leverage. If she would not yield to his desires willingly, perhaps the threat of prosecution would alter her disposition. And it was then that Quintanus remembered that he was not merely a man, he was the law. The courtroom fell into a profound silence as Agatha entered, bound in chains. Her judge, jury, and accuser all bore the same countenance. Quintanus had meticulously orchestrated every aspect. The formal charges read like a death sentence: practicing Christianity, corrupting Roman citizens, refusing to offer sacrifices to the gods, and sedition against imperial authority. Each accusation individually carried severe penalties. Combined, they guaranteed the outcome the prefect desired. The year 250 AD had ushered in renewed peril for Christians across the empire. Emperor Decius, intent on re-establishing traditional Roman values and halting the empire's perceived decline, issued an edict mandating all citizens to sacrifice to the Roman gods. Local commissioners oversaw these sacrifices, issuing certificates to those who complied. Those who refused faced imprisonment, torture, and death. For Quintanus, the Decian persecution provided a perfect pretext for his personal vendetta. He had convened an audience of Catania's elite, ensuring maximum humiliation for Agatha's family. Guards lined the walls, their presence a stark reminder that resistance meant death. The prefect donned his finest toga, the purple stripe signifying his rank prominently displayed. He wished for Agatha to perceive the full magnitude of Roman authority arrayed against her. However, as she entered, her back erect and her eyes clear despite her shackles, something in her bearing caused him to grip the arms of his chair until his knuckles turned white. "You stand accused of the gravest transgressions against Rome and its deities," Quintanus commenced, his voice resonating through the marble hall. "Yet even now, clemency remains a possibility. Forswear this Christian delusion, offer sacrifice to our gods, and perhaps alternative arrangements can be made concerning your future." The implication hung heavy in the air. Everyone present understood the nature of the prefect's proposed arrangements. But Agatha had prepared a specific defense. She spoke with the lucidity of one who had discovered a truth worth dying for. "I serve Jesus Christ. I confess him with my lips, and I cannot be separated from him. Your threats are inconsequential to one whose treasure resides not in this world, but in the next." Her words struck him like physical blows. Each syllable reinforced her rejection, now public and undeniable. The assembled nobles shifted uneasily, recognizing the personal animosity underlying this ostensibly legal proceeding. Quintanus's countenance darkened as he leaned forward. "You presume to speak of treasure while shackled. Your prosperity stems from Rome's protection. Your familial status exists at the empire's discretion, yet you choose a crucified criminal over the gods who forged Rome's greatness." "My nobility originates from serving Christ," Agatha replied. "My wealth is faith that cannot be plundered. You speak of gods who demand blood and fear. I serve a God who bestows love and eternal life. How can I renounce truth for comforting falsehoods?" The assembly murmured at her audacity. Some felt an involuntary admiration. Others harbored concerns of guilt by association. Quintanus felt his control slipping. This tribunal was intended to shatter her spirit, to compel her submission. Instead, she was transforming it into a platform for her faith. He needed to reassert his dominance. He needed to remind everyone who wielded authority here. "Perhaps you fail to grasp the gravity of your predicament," he stated, gesturing towards the guards. Rome possesses numerous methods for assisting bewildered young women in recalling their obligations. Some find clarity through incarceration, others through corrective measures, but all eventually learn that defiance of Roman law yields only suffering. "Then let me be unequivocal," Agatha responded, her voice reaching every corner of the room. "I am a Christian. I will not offer sacrifice to your gods. I will not deny my Lord, and I will not become your possession, neither through decree nor through coercion. Do with my body as you will. My soul belongs to Christ alone." The direct refusal, spoken publicly before Catania's elite, obliterated any pretense of legal proceedings. Quintilis rose from his seat, rage contorting his features. "You believe your faith shields you. You imagine your ethereal deity will preserve you from Roman justice. I shall demonstrate how Rome deals with recalcitrant women who forget their place." Yet, even as he threatened, a flicker of doubt crossed his mind. Something in Agatha's gaze, a serenity that should not exist in someone facing torture and death, unsettled him. He had subdued hardened criminals who had pleaded for death after mere hours under his jurisdiction. Yet this young woman stood before him, emanating a placid certainty. It was an intolerable situation. "Escort her away," he commanded. "Allow her to contemplate her decisions while confined. When we next convene, we shall ascertain how profoundly her faith provides solace." As guards led Agatha from the courtroom, Quintilis was already formulating his subsequent action. If he could not break her spirit through legal means, he would resort to something far more insidious. The heavy portal slammed shut, and Agatha found herself in the last locale any consecrated virgin should ever be. Quintilis had devised this punishment with calculated cruelty. Instead of a common prison, he had consigned her to Aphrodisia's establishment, the most notorious den of iniquity in Catania's port district. The message was unambiguous. If Agatha refused to surrender her virtue willingly, he would see it violated through degradation. Aphrodisia herself was a woman who had survived by hardening herself against her circumstances. Once beautiful, now embittered, she managed her establishment with an iron grip. Quintilis offered her a substantial sum to shatter the young noblewoman's spirit. 30 days, he instructed her. Ensure she comprehends that her cherished virginity is merely flesh to be bartered. Break her faith, and I shall double your remuneration. The brothel occupied a dilapidated insula adjacent to the docks. Sailors and merchants thronged its common area, where wine flowed freely and morals were dispensed cheaply. The air was thick with the odors of sweat, spilled wine, and desperation. Aphrodisia's courtesans moved through the crowd with practiced smiles that never reached their eyes, entering this milieu of deliberate corruption. They thrust forth a young woman who had known only privilege and prayer. Each night presented new trials for her faith. Aphrodisia employed every stratagem honed over decades in her profession. She assigned Agatha the most menial and unsanitary tasks, hoping that such drudgery would erode her aristocratic pride. When that proved futile, she resorted to seduction of a different nature, promises of comfort, exquisite attire, an easier existence, contingent upon her compliance. She displayed the brothel's most successful courtesans before Agatha, women adorned with jewels who spoke of influential patrons and opulent lifestyles. Yet something extraordinary was unfolding. Rather than corrupting Agatha, the young Christian was transforming her confinement. She spoke to the other women, not as fallen souls, but as cherished daughters of God. She shared her meager provisions with the youngest girls, some barely out of childhood. When sailors became aggressive, Agatha intervened, employing her noble bearing to shame them into restraint. She prayed openly, imparting to others the Christian hymns that offered redemption regardless of past transgressions. The brothel's ambience began to undergo a subtle alteration. Women who had forgotten any existence beyond these walls started to recall dormant aspirations. Agatha recounted narratives of Mary Magdalene, whom Christ had loved and forgiven. She spoke of a deity who recognized their inherent worth beyond their present circumstances. Several girls began participating in her prayers. Others found solace simply in her presence, a testament to the possibility that dignity could endure even in such a place. Aphrodisia observed these developments with escalating apprehension. This was not the intended outcome. She had subdued numerous women, crushing their spirits until they resigned themselves to their fate. However, Agatha seemed to grow more resilient with each passing day. More concerningly, her influence was disseminating. The carefully cultivated despair of the brothel was fracturing, supplanted by something perilously akin to hope. Clients began to report that some of the women now declined certain acts, citing a newfound sense of self-respect. "You are jeopardizing my enterprise," Aphrodisia confronted Agatha one evening. "These women had accepted their circumstances until you filled their minds with fantasies. Your God is not present here. He has no concern for them and their illegitimate offspring. Cease providing them with false hope." Agatha's response revealed the inherent fortitude beneath her gentle demeanor. God is omnipresent, particularly among the broken and the marginalized. You have constructed your life upon the suffering of others, but this need not persist. Even you can discover forgiveness and a renewed purpose. The chains you have fashioned for others bind you just as tightly. The older woman recoiled as if struck. No one had spoken to her of forgiveness in decades. For a fleeting moment, something flickered within her hardened eyes. A recollection of the young woman she had once been before life's cruelties had stripped away all softness. But her survival instincts reasserted themselves. Aphrodisia could not afford compassion. Quintanis's gold held greater weight than any burgeoning conscience. She resorted to new tactics. Drugged wine which Agatha steadfastly refused to consume. Threats directed at the younger girls, should Agatha fail to comply. Promises of freedom for some women if Agatha would acquiesce to one client. Each endeavor proved futile against the young woman's unshakable conviction. Prayer sustained her through periods of hunger. Meditation carried her through exhaustion. Her unwavering certainty of God's presence rendered every threat hollow. As the 30 days approached their conclusion, Aphrodisia confronted a daunting realization. Agatha had not only failed to be subdued, but the esteemed woman's presence had fundamentally altered the brothel's character. 3 women had departed, seeking refuge in Christian communities. Others openly engaged in prayer, their devotion serving as a bulwark against despair. The carefully constructed system of subjugation that Aphrodisia had maintained for years was unraveling. As the month concluded, Quintanis received news that ignited his fury. Agatha emerged from the establishment, not vanquished, but radiant. Her faith, tested and proven, remained unyielding. Moreover, whispers circulated throughout Catania's underbelly, concerning the maiden who had transformed a place of sin into a haven for devotion. Quintanis's calculated cruelty had spectacularly backfired, forging a legend that would endure beyond them all. The door to the torture chamber creaked open, revealing implements designed for a single purpose: to compel the most resilient soul to plead for mercy. Quintanis himself had personally overseen the preparations. The rack gleamed with fresh lubricant. Iron hooks dangled like metallic claws. Braziers glowed with embers that promised to strip flesh from bone. He desired Agatha to witness everything, to grasp the consequence of her continued defiance. He presented one final opportunity, his voice resonating against stone walls, stained with ages of suffering. "Renounce your Christ," he offered, his words devoid of warmth, conveying only the grim certainty of what awaited refusal. "Offer sacrifice to the gods. Accept my protection." His torturers stood at the ready, men seasoned in military campaigns, capable of prolonging agony to unimaginable extremes. Yet Agatha's response astonished everyone present. She advanced willingly, approaching the instruments of torment as if greeting familiar companions. "Proceed as you must," she stated calmly. "Each torment you inflict draws me nearer to my Lord. Each suffering you inflict underscores the futility of earthly power against eternal truth. I pity you, Quintanis, for you can only assail my physical form." The prefect's composure fractured. He had anticipated tears, pleas for clemency, eventual surrender. This serene acceptance fueled his rage to an uncontrollable pitch. He seized the nearest torturer, propelling him toward Agatha. "Break her," he commanded. "Employ every method. I wish to hear her cry out to those false deities for salvation." They commenced with the rack, stretching her limbs until separation seemed imminent. The device's mechanical cruelty had subdued seasoned warriors and hardened criminals alike. However, Agatha's lips moved in continuous prayer, her voice never escalating to the screams Quintanis craved. She spoke of extending forgiveness to her tormentors, of the joy in participating in Christ's afflictions, and of the eternal reward awaiting those who persevered. The torturers exchanged uneasy glances. They had witnessed victims succumb to unconsciousness or madness to escape torment. But Agatha remained fully lucid, her gaze clear and unwavering when they paused, expecting a plea for respite. Instead, she encouraged them to contemplate their own spiritual welfare. "You merely follow directives," she articulated gently. "But what gain is there in securing Quintanis's favor while forfeiting eternal life?" It was then that Quintanis issued an order that caused even the torturers to falter. The iron claws were next designed to rend flesh into strips. One torturer, a veteran of brutal campaigns, hesitated before the young woman's resolute gaze. "Prefect," he began hesitantly, "perhaps we should—" Quintanis's backhand sent him sprawling. "Do it yourselves if you will not," he snarled at his guards. "Show these cowards how Rome handles dissent." Blood began to flow freely. Yet Agatha remained unbroken. She spoke of Peter and Paul, who met their end for the faith within Rome itself. She recited psalms that her fellow believers had imparted to her. She assured her tormentors that redemption was attainable for them too, should they abandon cruelty for Christ. Her words possessed such conviction that two guards quietly withdrew from the chamber, unable to continue witnessing the spectacle. The torture escalated to methods that tested the limits of human endurance. Heated irons seared her skin. Whips tore at already wounded flesh. Throughout this ordeal, Agatha's faith appeared to strengthen rather than wane. An inner luminescence emanated from her, unrelated to the brazier's flames. Some observers later claimed to have heard singing, though whether it originated from Agatha or unseen entities remained uncertain. Quintanis paced the chamber like a caged predator. Nothing yielded the desired result. Each act of torture, intended to elicit primal cries, seemed only to elevate her beyond earthly concerns. He observed the growing reluctance of his torturers, the apprehension in their eyes, stemming not from him, but from the woman who offered them blessings even as they inflicted pain. His authority dissolved before a power he could neither comprehend nor counter. "Why will you not yield?" he finally cried out, his facade of composure completely shattered. "What makes you believe your God concerns himself with your suffering? Where is he now?" His questions betrayed a deeper terror, a dawning suspicion that her God was indeed present, that divine power might be sustaining her through torments that should have claimed her hours prior. Agatha's reply, though weakened by pain, resonated with unwavering certainty. "He is here, suffering with me," she stated. "He resides in your torturer's hesitation, in your God's compassion, even in your own anger, which acknowledges a power superior to Rome. You can destroy this body, Quintanis, but you have already been defeated. Every wound proclaims my faith's triumph over your force." What transpired next would become the defining chapter of her narrative. Driven beyond reason by his failure to subjugate her will, Quintanis would command an act so barbarous that even Rome's brutal standards would deem it excessive. First, however, he needed to locate torturers willing to execute his most heinous decree. Certain acts of cruelty transcend their era. Quintanis's subsequent order was one such instance. The prefect's voice lowered to a whisper that conveyed more menace than any shout. "If she holds her purity in such high regard, let us see how she feels when we take more than just her dignity. Sever them. Let her cherished virginity be marked by a disfigurement no man would desire." Even the hardened guards averted their gaze. The torture chamber had borne witness to countless horrors. But this command targeted something more profound than mere flesh. It was an assault on Agatha's very womanhood, designed to obliterate not just her body, but her identity. The cultural significance was not lost on anyone present, in an era where a woman's worth was often measured by her attractiveness to a husband and her capacity for childbearing. Quintanis decreed a mutilation that would render her worthless by society's unforgiving standards. The head torturer, a man who had inflicted unimaginable agonies without flinching, found his hands trembling. "Prefect, this transcends the law. Even slaves are not—" But Quintanis's eyes blazed with madness. It was the fury of a man whose authority had met its limit in one woman's unwavering faith. "Do it," he hissed, "or join her on the rack." They employed iron pincers heated in the braziers. The specifics of what followed need not be elaborated. History records the deed, not the process. What matters is the confluence of ultimate cruelty and ultimate faith within that chamber. As the unspeakable act was performed, Agatha's response irrevocably altered the perception of those compelled to witness it. Her words in that moment changed everything. Instead of curses, she offered forgiveness. Instead of animosity, she spoke of love. "Father, forgive them," she gasped, echoing her Savior's pronouncement. "They know not what they do. Quintanis, you have seized what you believe defines me as a woman, but you cannot touch that which renders me human, my soul beloved by God." The throng assembled outside the chamber, drawn by word of the special torture, fell silent upon hearing not screams of agony, but pronouncements of benediction. Even through thick stone Agatha's voice carried, "Lord, you have fashioned all of me. If it is your will that I relinquish a portion of this earthly vessel, I offer it freely. Let my suffering guide others to your love." A transformation occurred within the chamber's atmosphere. The torturers retreated, some openly weeping. Guards who had participated in countless executions found themselves unable to look upon their actions. One young soldier discarded his weapons and fled, later discovered in a Christian congregation seeking baptism and absolution. The sheer extremity of the barbarity seemed to highlight the inadequacy of physical force against spiritual fortitude. Quintanis stared at the mutilated woman who somehow still radiated dignity. Blood soaked her tattered garments, yet she maintained the bearing of royalty. Where he had expected a broken wretch begging for death, he instead beheld a saint poised on the threshold of heaven. His victory had transmuted into his defeat in a manner both public and undeniable. The crowd's horror and shift in sentiment became palpable. Women in the assembly pressed forward, some fainting at the sight, others uttering imprecations against Quintanis for his barbarity. Even seasoned citizens who had witnessed numerous executions found this act beyond contemplation. The mutilation of a virgin of noble birth crossed a line separating civilization from savagery. Murmurs of monster and demon followed the prefect's name. Most remarkable, however, was Agatha's continued ministry, even in her extremity. As they dragged her from the torture chamber, she addressed the crowd. "Weep not for me, daughters of Catania. Weep rather for those who believe violence can overcome love. What you have taken from my body, God will restore to my soul. Let my wounds remind you that nothing, not torture, not disfigurement, not even death itself, can sever us from divine love." Her words disseminated through the city with the speed of wildfire. In taverns and marketplaces, people spoke in hushed tones of the maiden who blessed her tormentors while they disfigured her. Some recounted a luminous aura surrounding her even as blood pooled at her feet. Others affirmed hearing angelic hymns as she was conveyed to her cell. The narrative grew with each recounting, yet at its core lay an undeniable truth. Quintanis had inadvertently created a martyr whose testimony would outlast the empire itself. Left to perish in the gloom, a miracle was poised to unfold. The prefect had decreed no sustenance, no hydration, no medical care. He intended for Agatha to expire slowly, in solitude, abandoned by the deity she claimed to serve. Yet divine providence had charted a different course. Within the confines of a cell, as infection and blood loss brought her to the brink of death, the heavens themselves would intervene in a manner that would irrevocably alter events. In the suffocating darkness of the cell, as death drew near, Agatha suddenly found herself no longer alone. The dungeon beneath Quintanis's palace was designed to crush prisoners through profound isolation. No windows allowed any ingress of light. The walls wept with moisture, fostering disease. Rats scurried amidst refuse and despair. Here, Agatha's mutilated form had been cast, expected to succumb within hours from shock and hemorrhage. But as midnight approached on the fourth night, something extraordinary transpired. A gentle radiance began to suffuse the cell, originating not from any terrestrial source, but seemingly emanating from the very atmosphere. The light intensified, growing warmer, carrying with it a fragrance akin to spring blossoms that overwhelmed the dungeon's foul stench. Agatha, delirious with pain and fever, initially perceived this as death's arrival to claim her. However, the figure emerging from the luminescence was someone she recognized from scripture and sacred tradition. An aged man materialized, bearing the time-worn countenance of a fisherman, yet radiating an authority that dwarfed any earthly ruler. In his hands, He held objects that seemed incongruous in this place of suffering. Gleaming surgical implements and vials containing what appeared to be a healing unguent. Though Agatha had never encountered him in his earthly life, her spirit recognized him instantly. This was Peter, the apostle who had met his end for the faith in Rome, now dispatched as heaven's physician. "Daughter," Peter spoke, his voice imbued with the weight of eternity. "Your unwavering faithfulness has deeply moved the heart of heaven. The Lord who suffered for all has witnessed your suffering for him. I am sent not because you require healing to prolong your earthly existence, but so that your testimony may be rendered complete. Arise, beloved of Christ. Your appointed task is not yet concluded." When the guards conducted their morning check, they were met with utter disbelief. The woman they had left for dead, bleeding in her own cell, stood at the doorway, whole and radiant. Where severe wounds had marred her flesh, smooth skin now prevailed. The mutilation that should have proven fatal had vanished as if it had never occurred. More disquietingly still, the cell itself had undergone a transformation. The oppressive darkness that typically weighed down prisoners had yielded to a subtle luminescence that seemed to emanate from Agatha herself. The guard who discovered her collapsed to his knees, not out of protocol, but from genuine reverence. Throughout his career, he had witnessed death in numerous guises, but never had he observed it recede so completely. His faltering report to his superior initiated a cascade of disbelief and subsequent verification. Guard after guard descended to the dungeon, each anticipating some form of deception or trickery. Instead, they encountered a miracle that defied all natural explanation. Word of the event reached the palace with the morning repast. Servants whispered in the corridors about the prisoner who refused to die. Kitchen staff spoke of divine intervention as they prepared Quintanus's breakfast. By the time the prefect's personal attendant mustered the courage to deliver the news, half of Catania had already absorbed some iteration of the account. The Christian community, in particular, received the intelligence with elation, tempered by apprehension. God had indeed vindicated their sister, but surely Quintanus's wrath would intensify. The theological ramifications resonated throughout both Christian and pagan circles. For the faithful, Agatha's recovery substantiated every proclamation regarding their God's dominion over death and affliction. It presented tangible evidence that martyrdom was not defeat, but victory, and that steadfast endurance invited divine intervention. For the pagans, the occurrence challenged their comfortable assumptions regarding their deity's supremacy. If the Christian God could manifest such miracles, what implications did this hold for Jupiter and Minerva? Beyond the theological considerations, however, lay the human impact. The guards who had participated in Agatha's torture were confronted with undeniable proof of a power that rendered their cruelty utterly meaningless. Several requested transfers, unable to face the woman they had brutalized, who continued to treat them with unwavering kindness. Others began discreetly inquiring about Christian doctrines, drawn by a faith that could inspire such divine protection. The dungeon, once a site of countless horrors, had been transformed into consecrated ground. Agatha herself exhibited remarkable composure regarding her healing. When fellow prisoners called out, inquiring about the events, she simply responded that the creator of the human body possessed the ability to restore it. She devoted her remaining time in the cell to praying for her persecutors and singing hymns that echoed through corridors typically filled only with despair. Her very presence rendered the dungeon a sanctuary, displacing hopelessness with an impromptu haven. News of the miracle reached Quintanus during his breakfast. His reaction would ultimately seal both their destinies. The prefect, who had staked his authority on subduing a single young woman, now faced evidence that powers beyond Rome's purview protected her. His response would reveal whether any vestige of wisdom remained beneath his wounded pride, or if sheer rage would propel him toward even greater excesses. The servants who delivered the news retreated with haste, sensing the tempest gathering in their master's eyes. Quintanus stood before the miraculously healed woman, his countenance shifting from disbelief to outright fury. The morning sunlight streaming through the judgment hall's windows seemed to spotlight the impossible. Agatha stood before him, whole, unmarked, radiating a serenity that rendered his ornate throne a childish imitation of power. Every scar his torturers had inflicted had vanished. The mutilation that should have been fatal might have been a mere nightmare, were it not for the blood-soaked rags that served as testament. "Witchcraft!" The word erupted from him like a profanity. "You dare introduce sorcery into my court? What demon did you summon? What dark arts did you practice?" His voice cracked, betraying the terror concealed beneath his fury. Within his worldview, power flowed from Rome through him to his subjects. This inversion of the natural order threatened not only his authority, but his very comprehension of reality. Agatha's response carried the calm conviction of absolute certainty. "No demon healed me, Quintanus," she stated. "The God who fashioned humanity from dust can assuredly mend what human cruelty has broken. Your own gods bore witness to heaven's intervention. Will you contend against the divine itself? Has your intoxication with power led you to challenge the Creator?" His commands became increasingly frantic. "Double the guard! Summon the priests of Jupiter! Someone explain this deception!" But the priests, upon their arrival, could only confirm Quintanus's deepest fears. No known magic possessed the ability to achieve such flawless restoration. Several discreetly suggested that perhaps the Christian deity warranted consideration. This advice nearly cost them their lives as Quintanus's control spiraled toward complete disintegration. The crowd began to murmur, and a palpable shift occurred. Citizens who had gathered anticipating another execution sensed they were witnessing something far more momentous. Mothers clutched their children tighter. Merchants forgot their appointments. Even the guards appeared uncertain, their usual brutal efficiency replaced by furtive glances exchanged between their charge and their increasingly unhinged commander. The very bedrock of Roman authority, the threat of pain and death, had proven utterly impotent. "If your God is so potent," Quintanus snarled, "abandoning all pretense of legal proceedings, then let him save you from this. Prepare the coals, bring forth the pottery shards. We shall see if divine healing extends to being immolated." His commands came in rapid succession. "Fire now!" The words of a man who had transcended reason into a realm of utter darkness. He needed Agatha dead, not for the sake of law or order, but because her continued existence underscored his own impotence. The preparations took on a nightmarish quality. Slaves scattered fragments of broken pottery across the courtyard, creating a treacherous bed of sharp edges. Others stoked the braziers until the coals glowed with incandescent heat. The instruments of execution were deliberately rudimentary, selected to inflict maximum agony while precluding a swift demise. Quintanus desired the crowd to witness Agatha's faith finally falter as her flesh dissolved from her bones. However, the crowd's disposition had undergone a dramatic transformation. Where the spectacle of bloodshed typically ignited bloodlust, an unsettling unease now dominated. Far too many had heard of Agatha's miraculous recovery. Far too many had observed her extend forgiveness to the torturers who had maimed her. Mothers who had brought their children to witness Roman justice found themselves questioning the very nature of justice when it sought to subjugate miraculous healing. Whispers of injustice and sacrilege rippled through the assembly. Agatha surveyed the preparations with remarkable composure. "You prepare earthly flames," she observed, "but you cannot touch the fire of faith within me. You sharpen pottery to sever flesh that heaven has already consecrated for glory. I pity you, Quintanis. In your attempt to annihilate me, you have exposed the emptiness of your power. What will you do when I am gone, and my faith persists, spreading like embers through hearts you cannot shackle?" Her words struck with prophetic accuracy. Already, news of her steadfastness had emboldened hidden Christians throughout Sicily. Young women in particular drew courage from her example, recognizing that virginity consecrated to Christ offered a strength surpassing any earthly protection. The sheer public nature of Quintanis's persecution had inadvertently become Christianity's most potent advertisement. Every act of excess prompted more citizens to question the truth that could inspire such unwavering perseverance. As arrangements for the fire and sharp implements were made, a seismic event commenced its unsettling progression. Initially, it manifested as mere vibrations that caused roof tiles to clatter and dogs to vocalize their alarm. However, the Earth's quaking grew in intensity, as if the planet itself registered its descent to the impending proceedings. Stone edifices emitted groaning sounds. Fissures started to spiderweb across the polished marble flooring of the tribunal hall. The portable braziers teetered precariously, dislodging fiery embers that laborers rushed to contain. Amidst this escalating disorder, Agatha's voice, clear and resonant, emerged, initiating the supplication that would reverberate through the ages. The culminating chapter of her terrestrial existence was poised to unfold. The very ground beneath Quintanis's feet began to fracture. Even the natural world appeared to express its disapproval. What commenced as minor tremors escalated into surging undulations that caused individuals to falter. The meticulously positioned hot coals dispersed as the braziers toppled over. Fragments of pottery leaped and vibrated as if imbued with life. Stone structures throughout Catana emitted groans and swayed, their foundations challenging centuries of Roman architectural expertise. This was no commonplace seismic disturbance. Its precise timing and force suggested a manifestation of divine disapproval. Panic erupted in the central plaza. Spectators who had gathered to observe an execution now fled for their lives as debris rained down from above. The ornate ceiling of the judgment chamber started to crack. Plaster descended like a snowfall upon the assembled populace. Cries filled the air, but not from the woman slated for execution. Instead, Agatha remained composed amidst the pandemonium, her lips moving in a continuous invocation while destruction swirled around her. The stark contrast was undeniable. The virgin destined for death stood serene while her tormentors exhibited fear. Buildings across the entire city began to sway. The harbor district, constructed on newly acquired land, experienced the initial impact. Warehouses collapsed, inundating the streets with spilled grain and commercial goods, while the thoroughfares themselves split open with new chasms. The temple dedicated to Jupiter, a symbol of Roman religious authority, lost its eastern wall in a grinding cacophony of stone and wood. Opulent residences situated on the hillsides shed their decorative facades like molting skin, revealing the underlying brickwork beneath their pretentious marble exteriors. Quintanis's own palace issued ominous groans, its foundations shifting with each seismic surge. Yet amidst the devastation, certain structures remained inexplicably unharmed. The dwellings where Christians convened for worship stood firm. The residences where Agatha had distributed sustenance to the less fortunate sustained minimal damage. Most strikingly, the establishment where she had spent 30 days remained unscathed, while the adjacent buildings crumbled. Even in the midst of judgment, a selective form of mercy appeared to be at play, safeguarding those who had demonstrated compassion towards heaven's servant. Amidst the chaos, Agatha's voice rose, clear and strong, not in a cry of distress or a plea for rescue, but continuing the prayer she had begun. Lord, Creator of all, you who have shielded me from my earliest days and granted me the fortitude to endure afflictions, receive your servant now. Let this earthly dwelling be dissolved so that I may reside in your eternal abode. For the sake of your name I have endured suffering. For your love, I find joy in these trials. The terror of the crowd transmuted into something akin to spiritual reverence. Here stood a woman enveloped by destruction, yet untouched by fear. While seasoned legionaries whimpered and powerful men fled, she conversed with her deity as serenely as if standing in a tranquil garden. Some prostrated themselves, not due to the earthquake, but in recognition of sanctity. Others vociferously pleaded with her to intercede for the city's salvation, suddenly perceiving her not as a transgressor, but as a mediator. Save us, Holy Virgin, voices implored from the multitude. Beseech your God to spare Catania. The very individuals who had assembled to witness her demise now recognized her as their sole prospect for survival. The irony was palpable to all present. They pleaded for clemency from the one they had prepared to watch perish. However, Agatha's response illuminated the profound extent of her transformation through tribulation. Even facing her own end, she prioritized the salvation of others over her own safety. "Repent," she urged them, her voice somehow cutting through the earthquake's formidable roar. "Turn from false deities to the living God. Cease your persecution of his followers. Extend compassion to the impoverished and the afflicted. The Lord is patient, but he will not tolerate disrespect indefinitely." This tremor is a warning, not the final judgment. Choose today whom you shall serve. In the midst of the turmoil, conversions commenced immediately. A merchant who had defrauded Christian patrons collapsed, crying out for absolution. Guards cast aside their weapons, refusing to participate further in the persecution. Women who had previously derided Agatha's chastity now hailed her as blessed, recognizing divine favor in her unwavering resolve. The earthquake had inadvertently instigated a spiritual resurgence. Calamity had morphed into a spiritual awakening. The very stones proclaimed what human tongues had feared to utter. The pantheon of Roman deities proved powerless against heaven's wrath. Quintanis alone remained unmoved despite the crumbling of his palace around him. Wounded pride had ossified into a state beyond rational comprehension. Even as his counselors implored him to release Agatha and appease her god, he shrieked for the execution to proceed. However, his guards had absconded, his tormentors cowered in alcoves. His authority had dissipated like morning dew under the sun's glare. He stood abandoned, a prefect stripped of his power, raging at subordinates who no longer heeded his commands. Within a year, an event transpired for Quintanis that many interpreted as divine retribution. But first, Agatha's narrative required its resolution. As residual tremors continued to agitate Katana, she was escorted, not dragged, back to the pyre. This time, no force was exerted. She walked willingly towards her martyrdom, prepared to complete the testimony initiated 3 years prior. The earthquake subsided as she approached the flames, as if the earth itself held its breath for her final pronouncements. As the inferno licked at her feet and sharp fragments lacerated her skin, Agatha lifted her voice one last time. The seismic activity had diminished to mere tremors, leaving a hushed crowd amidst settling dust and debris. Those who had fled cautiously returned, drawn by something more than mere curiosity. They needed to witness this conclusion, to comprehend the force that could inspire such voluntary self-sacrifice. The coals hissed beneath her body. Pottery fragments drew blood with every respiration. Yet her voice emerged, clear and strong. But her words conveyed no pain. Instead, she spoke with the lucidity of one already perceiving earthly suffering from a heavenly vantage point. Lord, my Creator, I offer thanks for this honor of sharing in your afflictions. As you were encircled by thorns, I am adorned with flames. As nails pierced your hands, fragments tear at my flesh. Yet this fleeting hardship is forging for me an eternal abundance of glory. The crowd pressed closer, straining to capture every utterance. Hardened soldiers openly wept. Women who had arrived anticipating a spectacle now covered their faces in shame. Even creation seemed to pause. Birds fell silent, the wind stilled. The very atmosphere felt expectant. This was no longer merely an execution. It had transformed into something sacred, an intersection between heaven and earth, where ordinary mortals glimpsed eternal realities. I forgive you, Quintanis, Agatha continued, her gaze finding the prefect amidst the wreckage of his authority. May my demise illuminate your path to truth before it is irrevocably too late. I forgive you, people of Kitana. Your ignorance made you complicit in this injustice. May my testimony guide you towards the God who cherishes you despite your transgressions. I forgive all who have caused me harm, for they provided me opportunities to demonstrate my love for Christ. Within a year, a divine retribution befell Quintanis. Historical accounts allude obliquely to a fever that consumed him from within, accompanied by visions where he cried out Agatha's name and implored forgiveness from empty air. His end was protracted and agonizing, his body appearing to combust without any external flame. Medical practitioners could ascertain no cause. Priests of all deities proved incapable of offering succor. He died unmourned, his wealth dispersed, his name becoming synonymous with a malevolence that ultimately recoils upon its perpetrator. However, Agatha's passing ushered in a new era of life throughout Sicily. The earthquake had disrupted more than just structures. It had shattered complacent assumptions regarding power and conviction. Conversions multiplied as her narrative disseminated. Young women, in particular, found inspiration in her example, choosing spiritual devotion over advantageous marital unions. The brothel where she had resided for 30 days was transformed into a sanctuary for prayer. Former sex workers discovered renewed purpose within the Christian community. The seeds of faith she had sown blossomed into a flourishing garden that would endure beyond the empire's span. Her commemoration day, February 5th, became Sicily's paramount religious observance. When Mount Etna erupted in the year 252 AD, threatening Catana with annihilation, its citizens carried Agatha's veil in a procession towards the molten flow. The incandescent rock ceased its advance in the veil's proximity, thereby preserving the city. Subsequent miracles followed through the centuries. Plagues abated, invasions were repelled, natural calamities were averted through her intercession. The woman whom Quintanis sought to obliterate from history became its most formidable guardian. Houses of worship were erected where chambers of torture had once stood. Artistic representations of her martyrdom adorned chapels throughout the Christian world. Although artists emphasized her spiritual triumph over her physical suffering, literary figures from Ambrose to Methodius lauded her victory in hymns and homilies. Her name was incorporated into the liturgy of the Mass, recited daily wherever Latin Christianity extended its reach. The noble maiden who opted for Christ over material comfort became the patroness of nurses, artisans who cast bells, and all individuals afflicted with breast cancer. Her mutilation was transmuted into a source of healing for others. Yet perhaps her most significant enduring impact lies in her redefinition of strength itself. In an era that equated power with aggression and dignity with social standing, Agatha demonstrated that true nobility emanated from within. She illustrated that a young woman armed solely with faith could outlast an empire founded on coercion. Her act of forgiving her tormentors challenged ingrained patterns of retaliation. Her concern for others, even in the throes of death, revealed love's precedence over self-preservation. She proved that certain victories are achieved not through confrontation, but through endurance, not through animosity, but through affection. As the flames ultimately claimed her mortal form on February 5th, 251 AD, Agatha's spirit ascended to freedom. Her final utterance, "Into your hands, Lord, I commend my spirit," echoed her Saviour's words from the cross. The Virgin, who had dedicated herself to Christ at the age of 15, completed her testimony at 21, leaving behind a legacy that would inspire countless others to prioritize eternal riches over ephemeral pleasures. The saint whose breasts were severed due to her Christian faith transformed unspeakable barbarity into everlasting glory, proving that no earthly authority can subjugate a soul anchored in divine love. And so we return to our starting point. A young woman upon fiery embers, pottery shards piercing her flesh, yet speaking words of triumph rather than defeat. But now we comprehend the journey that led Agatha to this momentous occasion. We have observed the noble girl who chose spiritual matrimony over worldly comfort. We have witnessed Quintanis's descent from an entitled official to a deranged persecutor. We have seen faith transmute a brothel into a hall of prayer and torture into a testament. The earthquake that convulsed Catana at the time of Agatha's demise was no mere coincidence. Early Christians interpreted it as heaven's pronouncement upon injustice. Creation itself was protesting the murder of the innocent. Modern seismologists acknowledge Sicily's location on active fault lines, but the timing remains paramount. That specific tremor, occurring at that precise juncture, conveying that particular message, transformed an execution into a divine revelation. The crowd that had gathered for diversion departed carrying questions that would irrevocably alter the course of their lives. Consider what we have observed through this ancient perspective. A 21-year-old woman confronted the full might of imperial Rome and emerged victorious. Not through force of arms or political maneuvering, but through an unyielding conviction that certain truths transcend earthly dominion. She exemplified that genuine power originates not from positions or possessions, but from principles for which one is willing to perish. In our era, characterized by compromise and convenience, her example compels us to reflect upon what we truly hold dear. Agatha's narrative serves as a reminder that persecution often exposes more about the persecutors than their victims. Quintilis began as a typical Roman administrator, corrupt but not exceptionally cruel. His encounter with principled defiance revealed the hollow core beneath his authority. Incapable of accepting rejection, he succumbed to obsessions that proved more destructive to him than any adversary could have managed. His fate serves as a warning that the imposition of our will upon others ultimately corrupts our own souls. However, this account transcends its historical context. Every generation contends with its own Quintanizes, those who demand conformity through coercion, who equate strength with righteousness, who endeavor to crush spirits that cannot be bought. And every generation requires its own Agathas, voices of conscience, who refuse to yield to unjust power, who demonstrate that human dignity can withstand any assault upon the physical form. Her testimony reverberates wherever individuals opt for integrity over security, principle over personal gain, and eternal values over transient advantages. The miracles associated with Agatha, her healing, the earthquake, and Katana's subsequent protection invite us to contemplate realities beyond the material plane. Whether interpreted literally or metaphorically, they point towards dimensions of human experience that pure rationalism cannot elucidate. They suggest that unwavering loyalty to transcendent truth confers a power that empires cannot rival. That love proves more potent than death, and that sacrifice for others generates ripples extending far beyond individual existences. For contemporary readers, particularly women, Agatha's story carries a profound and specific resonance. She lived in a world that largely regarded females as mere assets to be exchanged between men. Her vowed virginity represented a radical assertion of self-determination, reclaiming dominion over her own body and destiny. When Quintilis sought to punish this independence through gender-specific torture, she transformed his cruelty into a triumph. Her mutilation, intended to annihilate her womanhood, instead became a symbol of feminine strength that transcends physical definition. We might ponder how differently history might have unfolded had Agatha simply offered sacrifices to the Roman deities, married advantageously, and lived a quiet existence. Katana would have been deprived of its most venerated patron. Countless women across the centuries would have lacked her inspirational example of courage. The Christian Church would have missed one of its most potent witnesses to faith's dominion over brute force. Sometimes, the individual choices we make, particularly those demanding significant personal cost, yield consequences far beyond our initial comprehension. As we leave Agatha upon those burning coals, her voice lifted in final supplication, we are challenged to examine our own lives. What principles would we defend against overwhelming pressure? What truths do we value more than comfort or personal safety? When confronted with injustice, do we remain silent for the sake of self-preservation, or do we speak out regardless of the potential repercussions? Her example does not mandate literal martyrdom, but it does exhort us to live with purpose, integrity, and valor. The saint whose breasts were severed due to her Christian faith ultimately teaches us that human dignity resides not in physical attributes, but in souls aligned with eternal purpose. Her narrative commenced in privilege and concluded in suffering, but the journey between these points transformed tribulation into glory. She proved that certain victories are attained not by avoiding hardship, but by confronting it with faith. That true nobility stems not from lineage, but from conscious choices. that the greatest strength sometimes manifests as surrender. In her dying moments, Agatha achieved an immortality that Quintanis's power could never comprehend. Living eternally in the hearts of those who choose love over fear, truth over convenience, and eternity over the fleeting present, her witness continues. Wherever someone says no to corruption, wherever faith sustains people through persecution, wherever love forgives even those who inflict wounds, Saint Agatha of Catana remains alive in every act of principled defiance, every choice of integrity over advantage, every moment when human beings prove that we are more than flesh and appetite. We are souls capable of touching the divine.